Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. With you, as always, your host, Robert Zaglinski. We are a week out from the draft. I think I'm not alone in saying the draft process is probably too long and too drawn out. At this point, a little bit of cabin fever might be setting in, and a little bit of boredom as well. It's an interesting mix. I'm sure the NFL does this to get as much attention as possible and not have as small of a gap in terms of NFL events throughout the entire offseason. But it doesn't mean it's any less wearing. Still, like I said, this process is over in a week or so, and we can all yell at each other. We can all be angry over whatever happens regarding the Bears picks and everyone else across, well, really the entire league. To discuss all of this, because the Bears had a mini camp this week, and with all official prospect visits over, we can more or less begin to pinpoint what they've done, what they're doing, or what they're going to plan to do in the draft. I'm pleased to be joined by 247 Sports Matt Eurich. Matt, what's up?
Not much, Robert. Ready to talk a little draft, even though it feels like we've been talking draft for 2-3 months.
Yeah, at this point, we more or less know everything. It's that time of year where everyone's circling back or everyone's nitpicking things that we've already discussed previously in February and January. It's just everyone finding a reason to get angry with each other. That's what it feels like to read Twitter on these days.
It really does. I swear. Like 2 weeks ago, everybody loves player X, and then now everybody hates player X for whatever reason. Yeah, it's getting to the point now where it's just like, let's just go with it already. Like, let's get on with it.
Before we go into the draft, Matt, we're going to discuss Bears minicamp impressions. So they had the veterans come into Hallis Hall this week. They're not really doing much. It's a bunch of shorts workouts. It's the first offensive installs. But the story has more or less been Matt Nagy's impressions. These are his first actual practices as Bears head coach. I think it's a bit of a refresher at this point, but he's different in the fact that I noted this. He has speeches prepared for every question at press conferences. He's not afraid to let reporters know what the Bears are planning. He's not afraid to discuss what excites him, what worries him. He seems to be very optimistic, and he seems to really be enjoying himself, especially in his first practice, his first practices as head coach.
Yeah, it is really refreshing, like you said, because we've spent the last 3 years with John Fox where it's just like over and over. It's the same stuff with John Fox. You knew you walked into it, you weren't going to get an answer. You were going to get him kind of, skirting around the actual answer with fear of giving something up, whatever he thought that actually meant. I don't know. Yeah, it is really refreshing to have Matt Nagy be prepared, have actual answers where it doesn't feel like he's giving you every single detail, because he's smart. He knows, not to do that. But it is refreshing to hear a little bit of personality. He was kind of joking around a little bit yesterday. I thought it was funny when they were asking him about about the draft, and he had said, you got to talk to Ryan about that, and then and all of that. And he kept kind of just joking around where, in the past, I think with John Fox, it would have just been, John would have been so dismissive of everything. And granted, a lot of it has to do with the fact that this is Matt Nagy's first head coaching job, and it's clear he's excited. I mean, I've picked that up immediately. I mean, from the moment they hired him, he seemed excited. But I definitely thought the last few days, just hearing him talk, there's an excitement. And I think players are going to sort of I'm not going to say that's all inspirational by having a head coach that's passionate like that, but and not to make sorry assumptions here, but like with a guy like Joe Madden, where he's a players love him, he's outgoing, he's willing to talk, and I think that Matt Nagy kind of is that guy in a sense that people just like him and enjoy what he has to say. So I think that's definitely a good sign.
Yeah, that was the weirdest thing with Fox, where he thought that he was giving away so much of a competitive disadvantage. But to just have a conversation with reporters without, you don't have to discuss your actual X's and O's, your entire playbook, but you can have a conversation like a human being normally, and that's not that's not giving anything away. And again, to my irresponsible comparison, I mean, that's kind of what the Eagles did last year and what they've done with Doug Peterson so far. They don't really care as much to tell you what they're going to do, because what matters is the execution on the field. That's ultimately the only thing that matters. Most teams and most opponents will already know what you're going to be doing. They're not watching your periscopes, or they're not watching the videos of your press conferences. They have access to film. They know what you're going to be doing. It's about who has the better players. It's about who executes better and understands, is able to use those competitive advantages to their best.
Yeah, and exactly, and that's exactly what you said. It's all about execution. There's no secrets in the NFL. There really is not. It's just everything's out there on tape. Yeah, there might be a few plays here and there that you've never seen that team run before, but it's not like that play's never been run in some level of the game at some point for the most part. And so, yeah, that was the thing that got so frustrating with John Fox. Bill Belichick gets away with it. He can get away with it.
He can't get away with it because they're always winning.
Exactly, and he doesn't have to tell you anything. But and to your point, you don't have to sit here and say, yeah, on in third down situations, on 3rd and 4 from the 25-yard line, we're going to run this play. You're not going to do that, but it doesn't mean that you can't be open and honest about what you're trying to accomplish, or what what sort of goals you set for players. And I think that Matt Nagy so far has done a good job of at least being far more personable.
How long do you think this lasts? Because I don't think, unless he's just a guy that's so passionate about his job, and he might continue this throughout his entire tenure with the Bears, however long it lasts. But I'm thinking that let's say the Bears go 6-10 or 7-9, he might be exasperated by December, just constantly being so detailed with in conversation.
Oh, and I agree. And that's the scary thing too, is in regards to Mark Trestman was kind of like this at the get-go, and I hate to make that comparison, but
Matt, please.
I know it's those words are very scary to say, but bringing up that he was so open about stuff, and he was so different from Lovey. And so that kind of made people like him a little more, I guess, at the beginning. And revisionist history makes all of us not particularly like Mark Trestman and all that. So, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see this sort of wane a little bit. I still don't think he'll ever get to that level of what John Fox was, though.
A few more discussion topics from minicamp. So I don't know. I guess putting in any dissent of maybe the Bears not being on the rise is not the best idea in terms of Bears Twitter, because everyone is very protective of many fans are very protective of their team. But I had seen, or rather you had heard, Akeem Hicks espousing about how the Bears had a top 10 defense last year. And while I agree that the team is on the ascent, I think that they're much further along than what a lot of players, not including Vic Fangio, he seems to be more realistic. A lot of those players think that they're on, what's the best way to put this? That they're really almost an elite unit, at this moment. I don't agree with that. I think 2017 was misleading. I think there are a lot of extenuating factors as to why maybe they weren't as good as they believe, meaning the Bears defense. But I just find it interesting how guys like Hicks, who's probably one of the Bears' but more vocal leaders, faces of the team, decides to paint the picture of their 2017 performance.
Yeah, and it's funny because I saw you had a little bit of a Twitter beef with some folks about this, and I agree with you because the stats are extremely misleading. And while I'm fine with Akeem Hicks sort of being, he's the leader of that defense, and you want him to be kind of that rah-rah guy and to push his teammates. But that unit, in my opinion, and I know that you feel the same way, they have a lot of holes they need to fill. There's a lot of room for improvement with that team. And I don't buy into them either being this top 10 team. I think they're probably, from a defensive standpoint, more so last year I would have said 15, 16, right in the middle of the pack range, but certainly far from elite. When you don't have the way that this roster is constructed, and I know we'll talk about this a little later with in terms of lack of pass rushers, and you still have questions. Is Adrian Amos going to be the guy that people painted as the best safety in football last year, which I disagree with?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people buy into that. A lot of fans buy into that and see – you look specifically at these numbers and you say, how dare you say they're not on the cusp of being an elite defense, when you can't just look at that, because so much more factored into that for them. And I completely agree with you that this defense needs a lot of work, and they're far, far from being an elite defense.
What do you think of the sentiment that the 2017 offense was so bad that it held back the unit? That's not football. For me, football isn't played in a vacuum. To assume that the Bears will naturally improve offensively and that's going to make the Bears defense all of a sudden great, that's really not how it works.
Yeah, you're still presented with the same scenarios. You still have to go out there and face the team you're facing. And I agree with you in that sense that just because the offense might be better, that doesn't mean that the defense is not going to be on the field as much. I mean, a lot of different things can factor into that. The Bears probably had an okay amount of longer drives that just didn't result in points. And I think people look at it, well, the Bears didn't score a lot of points, so the defense was out there all the time. But it doesn't work that way. And in terms of turnovers and all that stuff too, that I agree with you, it's not a vacuum, and I don't think an improved offense is suddenly just going to continue to push this Bears defense to the forefront of the best in the league.
I think you kind of touched on it, Matt, but we're going to obviously discuss it more later, but what do you think they need to actually start fitting these optimistic outlooks on defense?
Well, they need to take the football away. And that's been their biggest issue. It's been the biggest issue since Vic Fangio got here. And while they got it slightly better last year, I still want to see more consistency from Prince Amukamara, who is just not a guy who takes the football away. And Kyle Fuller, you want to see more of that as well. And then they have to get after the quarterback. And as of right now, there's very little in terms of what they have as pass rushers that make me feel confident in their ability to put any pressure on the quarterback. Outside of Leonard Floyd, who's coming off an injury, it's hard for me to get excited about what they can do in terms of putting pressure on the opposing quarterback.
Yeah, they have some pieces in place, but they don't necessarily they're not as stacked as other elite teams like the Jaguars or Vikings. They need a little bit more of a boost there. One final mini camp discussion. We're going to hear from Mitch Trubisky today, but that's a different thing. This is being recorded. This podcast is being recorded before it's going to be the first time he's spoken publicly since Matt Nagy was hired. But so with that in mind, we're going to discuss Big Daddy Tarik Cohen beefing up to 190 pounds. A lot of people see him as the complimentary back, but based off of hearing him speak yesterday, he's kind of painting himself as one of the league's premier game breakers, who's ready for a bigger load, who's ready to see the ball more and ready to kind of like become a premier face for the Bears.
Yeah, how about it? He added a whole 9 pounds to his frame.
That's actually a lot, though.
It is.
He's 5'6", Matt.
I will say that is impressive. The thing, and beyond football, the thing I absolutely adore about Tarik Cohen is that kid he has the best attitude and so much confidence. That's what I love. I love the quote he gave yesterday that said, "I'm the biggest guy in the room, no matter what room I walk into." And I think that plays into his personality a lot, and that plays into just the confidence he has. And I agree that I think people right now, and a lot of fans probably just say, well, look what Matt Nagy did with Tyreek Hill and all those comparisons. I don't think from a speed standpoint, yes, they're similar, but Tarik is not at the level at all of the receiver that Tyreek Hill is. But I give Tyreek some credit because of what he was talking about yesterday, that he was working a lot this offseason in terms of running routes. So I think we saw like just a little hint of what he could do last year, because when you had an offensive coordinator in Dow Loggins who either A, didn't know how to use him right, or B, wasn't allowed to use him in a variety of ways, I think the creativity is going to play a lot. I still don't think he's going to be this guy who is just this NFL superstar. I think Darren Sproles is the best comp, and that's no knock, because Darren Sproles at his best was so good at catching the football, being a change of pace back, can be a guy who could break it wide open on special teams. So I think Tariq's going to have a nice jump this year, but I don't know if I'm ready to put him in like that superstar mold. But he's definitely the best game breaker on this team.
What if so a lot of underlying accounts have him splitting out more at receiver. Would that paint the picture of them needing a real number 2 back behind the now full endorsement of Jordan Howard?
I would still say so. And just given their history, the fact that Ryan Pace has been drafting running backs in each of his drafts since he came over from the Bears, and I do think Tyreek's going to be more of like your slot, kind of like just a jack of all trades guy. So I wouldn't be opposed to them drafting another running back, and especially because this running back class has a lot of decent talent in it as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went that direction.
It's a nice segue into the prospect visits before we do. He is Matt Eurich, joining me on Windy City Gridiron Radio. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Eurich. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski, and follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. Like I said, Matt, prospect visits list. So I highlighted this a few days ago. You essentially, Wednesday was the cutoff date to have any guys come into Hallis Hall, but obviously those are 30 private visits. They've met with or spoken to a variety of different prospects, and the numbers break down like this: 15 receivers, 8 cornerbacks, 6 running backs, 6 safeties, 5 offensive tackles, 4 guards and centers, 4 quarterbacks, 4 edge. Oh, wait, they're going to replace Trubisky, Matt. 3 tight ends, 3 special teamers, 1 inside linebacker, and 1 defensive lineman. Notably, no Tremaine Edmonds as a visit throughout the entire process, because these have been conducted over the past 5 or 6 weeks or so. First glance, before we go in depth on this, what does that visit list tell you specifically, Matt?
I think, I don't know, it's kind of hard. I guess the wide receivers points to more, and especially because I don't have the full list in front of me, but I know that with a lot of those wide receivers, they seem kind of like back end undrafted guys and, some speedy guys in the mix. I still think wide receiver, and clearly after what happened with Cameron Meredith and moving on from him, that the wide receiver position is a much bigger focus. But as far as I remember from last year, did they have a lot of quarterback visits? Do you remember?
I don't. Well, yeah, they did. They met. I mean, they spoke with Deshaun Watson. They didn't. They never really. They didn't.
Because the Trubisky thing never really came out, right?
They didn't. Yeah, they didn't disclose the fact that they brought in Trubisky, and I don't think they actually did bring Trubisky into Hallis Hall. So that's more of Ryan Pace being stealthy or something. But they didn't bring him into Lake Forest.
Yeah, like I'm curious if that's like his new like thing, like is that his MO? Like, is it going to be, the Bears draft Tremaine Edmonds? It's like, we interviewed him out in Virginia. Like,
there'll be another feature story. Oh, the story of how the Bears nailed down Edmonds at a steakhouse.
Yeah, and he used the name Brian Urlacher as his reservation name. Like I loved how much people loved that he used James McMahon as his reservation.
Oh my God, they're going to be like the 85 Bears.
And people just, it was just like all of the meatheads just absolutely loved that. But yeah, back to the topic at hand. In terms of these, I try not to take too much stock in these visits, and primarily because a lot of these are like your back end guys. And it's really just a sense, I think, for them to get an idea or kind of a leg up on the undrafted process, because that's something that Ryan Pace has always been really strong talking about. I don't know if he's been super effective in terms of signing undrafted guys, but Cameron Meredith notwithstanding. But I think that's what that shows, is that they're kind of using this more as a way of getting ahead on those undrafted guys.
Yeah, so as far as the receivers, you're noting that the only guys that they brought in for private workouts, Calvin Ridley. Oh man, Matt, they're going to draft a receiver at number 8. They brought in Cortland Sutton from SMU, and a big guy, Alshon Jeffrey comparisons. Anthony Miller, who I particularly love. Equanimous St. Brown from Notre Dame. Elijah Marks. Honestly, like, as much as I analyze the draft, I don't know who that is. Brandon Shedd, again. Jonah Trinnaman is someone that was popping up a lot recently over the past week or so, an athletic freak from BYU. He might be a target later on. and then Trey Quinn and Andre Levrone and Jalen Tolliver. So I'm not really sure what all of this. I mean, these guys, a lot of these guys are 6th and 7th round prospects. If you move over to the edge, which is to me their biggest need, I think you
100% agree.
They brought in guys like Bradley Chubb, Arden Key, Marquise Haynes, or rather Bradley Chubb, Arden Key, Marquise Haynes was Senior Bowl, and then Matt Opplinger. So I mean, they brought 2 of the consensus guys, and that doesn't include Harold Landry, and that doesn't include Marcus Davenport. So I think Pace might again be pulling a fast one on everybody because those are notably glaring omissions.
Yeah, and with, like you said, like the biggest need for this team, and like I don't think Chubb is in the running. So
right,
and then Arden Key, who you mentioned,
he's like
Key.
a second, or he's like a day 2 guy or a day 3 guy at this point.
And it's just tough because you would. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they're going to like shock everybody and take somebody at number 8, but. Like a Harold Landry or Davenport, but who knows? I mean, it is just weird. It's hard to gauge anything concrete. I think what these workout visits have shown me is that I have even less of an idea of what they're going to do in this year's draft.
Which I guess is what they aim for, because if we don't know anything, as people that are constantly plugged in and looking for any bit of information, I don't think any competition or any other NFL teams more or less understand what Pace is going to do. So he's accomplished what he wants. Moving from this prospect visit list, so like I mentioned at the start of the show, Matt, the draft is a week away. We kind of touched on the edge defensive needs. They have needs on the interior offensive line. They might need a future starting cornerback. What are you expecting personally, with everything finally coming to a head next week for the Bears? What are guys that you have personally keyed in on that you like at their positions of need, and overall how everything's going to play out?
Well, like the interesting thing is a lot of times around this time of year, I feel fairly confident in 2-3 players or so in terms of who the Bears are going to draft. Like last year, I thought it was going to be Solomon Thomas. I thought that was going to be like the inevitable pick for them. Clearly, obviously, it shocked me with the Mitch Trubisky trade up and all that. So, but where I sit right now, I think Quentin Nelson makes a ton of sense. Everybody's talked about it. I don't think he lasts to number 8. I think he's become such this like immortal figure over the course of the last few months. I find that really interesting. But outside of him, I like Tremaine Edmonds a lot. I know you do too.
Yeah,
I love the versatility of a player like that, and he's still young, and I could see the age thing being both a positive and a negative, because you could look at it as maybe he's already hit his ceiling. We don't know. But at the same time, if this is his floor, then you have to feel so good about what a guy like Vic Fangio can do with him. I wouldn't rule out a Minkah Fitzpatrick, although I feel like he's kind of sliding a little bit in a lot of different mock drafts. But then again, that means very little. And again, like a guy like Roquan Smith, possibly there as well. So I think outside of it being Quentin Nelson, it's going to be defense. And as much as I would love for them to add a young pass rusher, which I think they will at some point, I don't see like Landry or Davenport being worth taking that early.
What do you say to those for the Edmonds talk that he's too young, so that he might not necessarily make the biggest impact right away? And the Bears are on Mitch Trubisky's rookie contract. So if Trubisky's pans out, then that means they will be paying him $35 to $40 million based off of a 5-year escalation, or based off what the salary cap should be 4 years from now. They'll be paying him in his next contract that much money per year, an average annual value. Tremaine Edmonds, him being 19, for as much as I love him, he might not be an elite talent until 2 or 3 years down the line. Is that much of a concern for you? For me personally, it isn't, because I think that they can play him anywhere. I think they can have him ready and being having a measure of impact right away, especially like you said with Vic Fangio in the fold and getting him polished up.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think that with a guy, Fangio is the biggest key here, and what he does, particularly with linebackers and specifically inside guys, but also with the outside backers, the fact that you can move him around doesn't mean they have to be pigeonholed to starting him at inside or starting him on the outside, that you can move him around. The flexibility is there. So, and a lot of people like to turn and look at the well, he's only 19. Look at what happened with Amobi Okoye and all of that. And I think it's so unfair to say, look at this guy and what happened a decade ago.
It's a different case study.
100% a different case, and it's unfair to him in that regard. I don't think the age should scare you away. And as much as I laid out the positives and the negatives, I think the positives outweigh it, because in a lot of ways, it's you have such a raw, talented player there. He has the things, the measurables that, the unteachable things. He's got that length, he's got that athleticism, what you love. Put him in a room with Vic Fangio and let him teach him to become what you think he could become. And I think the sky's the limit for a kid like him.
You mentioned Davenport and Landry not really being possibilities for you. So let's start with Landry. I said this last night. He kind of reminds me of Vic Beasley, and Ryan Pace has already famously passed on a Vic Beasley type in favor of Kevin White, which, to be fair, gave the Bears 3 extra first-round picks. So why do you not see Harold Landry being a fit at number 8 overall for the Bears?
I just feel like there is obviously the inconsistency with him over the course of the last few seasons, and then and what you said too. He, that's a really good point. I hadn't seen you mention that about Vic Beasley, but that does make sense. They are very similar players, and at the time, it was a position Chicago definitely needed in 2015 when they're making that switch to a 3-4 scheme, and he passed on Beasley. And I would have argued that was a much bigger need at the time than wide receiver. So I think that's a great point. That's I might have to steal that point from you now, because I do think that's a really good point.
Fair enough. In regards to Davenport, so he's a little bit more raw. He's probably more of a polished overall football player, but as an edge rusher, he's a guy that has to show a lot more. He's probably going to need someone like Fangio to polish him up, to add some counters and power combinations and stuff like that. He'd probably be a huge reach at number 8, but definitely wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for a Ryan Pace profile pick of an athletic freak with a high ceiling and a very, very low floor.
And exactly. And I agree with you with the fact that he needs more of an arsenal other than just speed. And that is what's been his greatest attribute. That's what's made him successful, was the fact that he's faster than you, quicker, more athletic. And that you could get away with that there at UTSA, but it's not really going to fly in the NFL. So he needs a lot more work. But he does fit that Ryan Pace mold, where you feel like, look, this kid's so athletic. We love his tools. And a lot in the sense with Tremaine Edmonds, where you love the measurables, you love all of that about him, the things you can't teach, and then you just hope you have a guy who can mold him the way you want. I would feel far more comfortable if, say, the Bears were sitting at 15 and took Marcus Davenport. I'd be fine with that. 8 seems like just a bit too much of a reach for me, and I think people would lose it if Ryan Pace takes Davenport at number 8.
Oh, draft Twitter in general would just be laughing at the Bears so much.
Yes.
You kind of mentioned it at 15. So let's say, if the Bears traded down, you'd be comfortable with Davenport. Would that mean you're comfortable with someone like Landry as well, or another prospect in general? And do you yourself see a trade being a possibility? And when I say a possibility, to me it's very unrealistic, because fans and teams always want to trade down and acquire more picks. When I say possibility, I say like 20-25% being of that being a likelihood.
Yeah, and I'm with you in the sense that so many people I love that. Well, Bears should just trade down. Oh, well,
it's so easy.
Hey, Buffalo, you want to give us your two first round picks? Let's do this. And people just assume it's so easy. And it's not, because it's not the way it works. And I love that. And that seems to be the big thing I've seen a lot lately, that people are like, you know what? Ryan Pace, it'd be in his best interest to trade down. It would be in most teams' best interest to trade down and to gain more picks and to get more capital, which this Bears team desperately needs. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think it'd be a great idea, especially if, for whatever, say Nelson is gone and you're not overly in love with Tremaine Edmonds at 8, and you trade back to number 12, right? Buffalo's got 12, I believe. Mm-hmm. And you trade back to number 12, and say Edmonds is still sitting there. I mean, you got to feel pretty darn good if you could drop back and still grab some more pieces. I'd be all for it, and I'm sure you'd be all for it too, as long as you feel confident about which players are still on the board. I'd feel a little bit better about taking a Landry or a Davenport outside of 15. I mean, it's weird to sit here and be like, at number 8, no way, but at number 12 or 15, sure.
Yeah.
But it does, it feels better if you recoup a second round or a third round pick along the way. So I'd be okay with it, but I'm with you. I don't think they trade down, just because I don't think, unless something happens crazy and Josh Rosen's still sitting there or something.
Well, that would be a dream, but
and I don't see that happening at all. So I don't see them trading out, but I definitely wouldn't be against it. I don't think anybody really would.
Okay, so for this scenario, the Bears have drafted Tremaine Edmonds at number 8 overall. Who would you then like at number 39, assuming they don't trade down from there? And there, I actually see the Bears that being very likely that the Bears trade down from 39, because it'd be much easier to do. But let's say they stay at 39. Who are you taking?
Ooh, boy, there's a lot of guys. I absolutely love Courtland Sutton. I don't know if he lasts that long. I doubt it, just because he's been the type of guy who's been really jumping up boards. Mm-hmm. I like him, but I'd be all about taking a wideout, or say like a guard like Isaiah Wynn's there, again, because that's such a huge need for this team right now. Christian Kirk, another name I like. I still think they need help at cornerback. So I think it's so wide open there. What about you? Who'd be like your dream scenario there with the 39th pick?
If Isaiah Wynn is there at 39, I'm doing a backflip, and I'm a very, I mean, I played football and I was like an athlete, but I'm nowhere near the kind of guy that has the kind of athleticism to create the torque in my own body to backflip. But I'm going to back if the Bears are getting Edmonds and Isaiah Wynn at 39. Most projections don't have him falling that far. But I've seen a lot of sentiments from like the quote unquote insiders saying that he might be one of the guys that potentially falls out. And if he say like 35 or 36, like I might even trade up for him. I love him. I think in terms of, I know a lot of people like Quentin Nelson, but to me, Isaiah Wynn at 39 is better of a value. And this might sound really like a hot take to some people, because again, like you said it before, Nelson is a god. But I think Isaiah Wynn is a better value in the second round, or even Will Hernandez, for example, from Utah. Those guys are better values in the second round than Quentin Nelson in the top 10, because they're almost just as good. And I don't think guards necessarily change the team as much as people would like to think. If you can get a guy like that in the second round and kind of entrench that, I mean, again, unathletic white guy like me is doing a backflip.
Well, and that's the thing too with both Wynn and Hernandez. I feel like without the god that is Quentin Nelson, those two would be they're already very high regarded. I don't think their place in this year's draft would change much, but I feel like people would view the two of them in a much better light. I think it's a little unfair to them that people will be like, well, if you don't get Quentin Nelson, you'll get Isaiah Wynn. Like, and it's like in any other draft, he would probably.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in like any other draft, he'd probably be the top guard, him or Hernandez. I feel like the two of them, it's just depending on what you like more from a guard between those two guys. But it's kind of weird that the godlike persona that Quentin Nelson has taken on here in the last few months.
This is the best interior offensive line class in years, and then Quentin Nelson is like the best guy to come out since what? Chance Warmack and Jonathan Cooper. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to have that in consideration. Okay, so we like a receiver or a guard, obviously. Sutton, Wynn, Hernandez, those guys are second rounders. Who are some sleepers that you would like particularly later on? Because Ryan Pace has traditionally, actually, especially in recent years, done very well with 4th and 5th rounders. I mean, they have 2 4th-round picks this year. They might use one of them as trade bait to potentially trade back in the 3rd round or maybe even move back. But last year they got Eddie Jackson and Tariq Cohen. Years past, they've gotten Adrian Amos. They've gotten Jordan Howard in the 5th. Who are some sleepers on day 3 that you're fond of?
Well, in terms of, back to the offensive line, I like Alex Kappa from Humboldt State. I was watching him a lot during the Senior Bowl practices and such, and on TV. And I love he is just a brutal monster. And similar in the sense where how Quentin Nelson gets all that pub for being that guy, being that physical presence. I don't think Kappa's footwork is nowhere near as good as Quentin Nelson's, but I like him in the mid rounds and especially with guards and most offensive linemen, you can still find pretty decent value. He's a guy I like Perry Nickerson too, the corner. He seems to be a guy that I think would be later though, probably 6th, maybe 7th round. A lot of speed. I like him too. The Bears still need more depth at corner. I think just because you brought back Amukamara and Kyle Fuller.
What, are you serious, Matt? Come on.
Yeah. What you mean? Those two aren't the best.
They're not the best
duo.
They were so good last year.
And that's and in the age of Pro Football Focus and all of those things, and no knock on those guys because they do a lot of very good things. But I think people look too much at those grades and say, well, look at Kyle Fuller. He was one of the top 5 graded corners in the NFL. Look at all of his pass deflections. Well, he was also targeted more than any other corner in the game last season.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of weigh those two things. So, but I look at Kappa and I look at Nickerson as 2 guys I really like later on in the draft. What about you? Who are 2 guys that are more than 2 guys that you like later in the draft?
I think EJ Schneider, so our draft guy at WCG, he highlighted Jannard Avery to me, and I've been watching him lately. So he's a pass rush guy that he's a pass rush guy that they should probably take a look at. He's more of a situational person. I mean, I think first year you can get 6 to 8 sacks out of him. He's a little undersized. I'm surprised. I'm really surprised, and I think maybe this is probably due to him not really participating in any draft activities, but Wake Forest's Duke Ejiofor. I mean, This guy's Alex Brown. This guy is like maybe a less athletic Pernell McPhee when healthy, of course. I think this is a guy that's a 10-year starter is a little bit hyperbolic because not many guys are 10-year starters, but he's going to play in this league for 10 years in some kind of role. And I think right away he can start opposite Leonard Floyd. You take him in the 3rd or 4th round because that's probably where he's going to go. If he went through like all these draft activities, he's probably a 2nd or 3rd rounder, but this year he can be there. This year's Eddie Jackson, quote unquote, is the guy that they get a value on later on. Brandon Parker. So Tariq Cohen's former friend. That's someone that I've highlighted a lot. I think which goes to your Kappa point, kind of builds on that. I really, really think that they need to get their future right tackle this draft. Like wherever that is, like maybe number 8's too far of a spot, but if they like a guy in the 2nd round or if they like a guy later on, they need someone that's becomes the starter in 2019 if they're going to go with Bobby Massey for this season. This should be the last year that Bobby Massey's here. If they want to build their successful offense, if they want to build the contending offense, they need both of their bookends to not be liabilities. And I like Charles Leno on the left side. I don't like Massey on the right side. So you take a guy like Parker who has all of the physical tools and he's a 4-year starter, and you have someone that could potentially be really great opposite Leno.
And when you think about Parker, too, the assumption is the Bears probably know him better than most because of their scouting of Tariq last year, or year and a half ago, whatever. But, yeah, I like Parker, too, and I'm 100% in agreement with you in terms of the offensive line and the tackles. I think Charles Leno is fine. He's shown improvement, and even though it might be marginal improvement from year to year, I at least appreciate the fact that I think he's getting better.
He can be a starting left tackle on a contender as well.
Yes. Yeah. And Bobby Massey, to me, though, it's just there's so much frustration with him. He could play a really good 3 quarters, and then he just lets the floodgates open, and he struggles, and his footwork, and he really struggles with anybody who is a speed and power guy who can just give you fits all day. His footwork gets so bad, and it's just I didn't particularly like the signing to begin with, anyways, with him. But I'm with you. They need to find a long-term starter at right tackle, and Bobby Massey's not going to be that guy.
A lot of draft stuff to go through in one more week. Cabin Fever, like I mentioned earlier, is going to end. You can follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Eurich. You can follow me on Twitter at Robert Zielinski, and follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. Matt, a few more topics to discuss, and one of them in a Bears fans' meatball dream, Devin Hester and Matt Forte are retiring together on Monday to kick off draft week next week. So you have probably the 2 most productive offensive / special teams field tilters of the 21st century for the Bears. I mean, I don't think that's really a stretch to say. And they're going to get the joint one-day contract signing ceremony together at House Hall. Going to be a whole little celebration. How do we remember these guys together, and how, as much as I'll make fun of it, I'm definitely going to make fun of it. How cool is it that you have two of these guys, that they're going to have this moment together in terms of Bears history and Bears lore?
The one thing I do think is funny, just because people have to always be upset about something, I saw people complaining that each player doesn't get their own separate day.
What?
Which, yeah, I saw it yesterday on Twitter, and I thought it was like, in my guess is they probably talked to each other about it.
Yeah, they probably wanted to do it together.
Yeah, exactly. But outside of that, the thing is, Devin Hester, in my opinion, I'm sure you probably won't argue here, he's a Hall of Famer. He's the type of person who completely changed the game. They changed the rules because of Devin Hester. And Devin was the type of guy that no matter what point of the game it was, whether he was a receiver or he was a return man, you stopped to watch what he did with the football in his hands. And when Jeff Joniak said that he was ridiculous, he simply was ridiculous. Devin Hester is one of my favorite players ever in a Bears uniform, one of my favorite to ever watch, just because he was so dynamic. Obviously, the wide receiver experiment wasn't the best thing, but I think he gets an unfair knock because of that too, because I do think Devin he wasn't built to really do that from the standpoint where he had never really done it. I thought he did fairly well considering he never really was a wide receiver. And then when you turn to Matt Forte, I think Forte was just so undervalued in the scheme, in the landscape, I guess you'd say, of the NFL. I think he'll always be extremely appreciated here in Chicago. People loved what he did, but I think from a national point of view,
he ran too upright, Matt. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
too upright.
Exactly. And it was one of the things. Like, I was looking back at his stats yesterday when this news broke, and you look at his numbers. It's just so consistent for him from, the outside of I got the numbers up here. 2009, he had 929 yards. 2011, 997 yards in 12 games. And then it was last year in Chicago, 898. Other than that, he eclipsed the 1,000-yard mark, which I know is not the same thing as it once was, but he was such a consistent player. And what he did as a pass catcher out of the backfield, I think Matt Forte deserves all the credit that he's going to receive. And I think it's great that him and, it was a little cheesy, a little corny to see the two of them together and to be excited about it. Yeah, but I could be a little cheesy and corny guy, though. So,
yeah, you take that value. I think the best thing that you can say about Hester is that he's probably the last of his breed, because the way there might be a future soon, very soon actually, where we don't even see kickoffs as a part of the game. I mean, I know the competition rule committee was discussing that in the owners' meetings a few weeks ago. I really think that's eventually going to happen. So you're going to see that play taken out altogether. Punters are better than ever at directional punting and at getting hang time, so you minimize that aspect of the game too. Hester really might have been the last great guy that we're going to see. So you're never going to see someone scoring on the opening play of the Super Bowl again. You're never going to see a guy striking fear into special teams coordinators to even let him touch the ball. To change field position in such a dramatic fashion like that, where he doesn't even have to really do anything to give his team an advantage. Hester, to your point, he's probably the most electric Bear I've watched in my roughly decade plus of following this team, covering this team, whatever. But I think he's probably the most electric football player I've watched. I've never seen a guy with the kinds of instincts he has on football's most exciting plays. That's what the returns, for as dangerous as they are, and as I keep saying that they should eventually be eliminated, they are the most exciting plays when someone like Hester is breaking plays open and is taking it downfield. The roar of the crowd, him following his blockers and finding the tiniest seams. I mean, it's unreal, and we're never going to see a guy like that again because of all the rule changes. And then in terms of Forte, I know it might be a little bit of a hot take, but if you have a more competent offensive coordinator consistently throughout his career, And Jay Cutler, for as much as people will love him, he's one of the most consistent, or he's probably the best Bears quarterback ever. If he's a little bit better as well, and they surround the whole offensive supporting cast better, we're talking about him like again, in my opinion, like a guy like Marshall Faulk or a guy like Curtis Martin. We're putting him in that same pantheon of runners and versatile guys that can catch passes. He makes more Pro Bowls, and he's getting more discussion for the Hall of Fame. For as much as I don't think he would have ever even made it if that happened. But he's not underappreciated at all if the Bears take more care to not have him be the only offensive threat for the 8 seasons he played here.
And it's true. It really was, because it was Matt Forte. And like you said, they never put the right pieces in place around Jay Cutler. And I agree with you in the fact that Forte would have been viewed in much more of that Marshall Faulk type light had they been more successful, been more of a winning team by putting an established offensive line around. And that's impressive too. For as much as people want to say, well, look at Cutler, he had to play behind bad offensive lines and all that. Matt Forte played behind those bad offensive lines and still was extremely, extremely productive. So I'm happy to see him retire this way. He already said a couple months ago he was planning on retiring as a Bear, or wanted to, but it's still a cool event, and I think it's something that makes fans happy to see guys like that get some respect, because a lot of people still look at the Bears in such a negative light in terms of their former players, because everybody wants to go back to the Brian Urlacher thing, which I think is very unfair. That there's a reason why he was only offered the deal he was offered, and nobody else offered him money, and people still look at that like the Bears are such this vilified thing when it comes to former players. So at least I guess this helps maybe change that perception a little bit.
I like to always finish off with a little non-football talk. I said this to Matt in the pre-show. So I don't know if this is necessarily one of the greatest horror movies ever. I think that's very hyperbolic, but it's certainly pretty unique. The concept is a little cop off of the video game Last of Us. I'm not sure if you know what that game is, Matt. Where the movie's A Quiet Place. I should say that, where if any sound is triggered, because they have like uber sensitive, hypersensitive hearing, they immediately attack you, and you're essentially dead. For lack of a better term, or lack of a better phrase. I think the experience of going to the theater to actually see it and having an entire crowd, entire audience at the theater just deathly afraid of making a noise, as if they're actually there with all of the characters. John Krasinski did such a great job. It's probably my best movie experience in years, to be honest. And I know you saw it. Actually, that's why I was asking you, because I saw you commenting on it on Twitter as well.
I loved it, and I'm in total agreement of you in terms of a movie-going experience. It was unlike anything I've ever been to in a theater, and it was a fairly packed theater, and it's so quiet, and I was like afraid to take a bite of my popcorn.
Yeah, people weren't even eating. That's the first movie that I've gone to in years where people didn't even eat. Like, people had bought all this candy and stuff for themselves, and I don't hear a peep halfway through the movie.
Exactly. And for people who are very much I'd rather watch a movie at home sort of thing, and I get that, this is a movie that will not have the same effect if you watch it solely at home for the first time, because I love the way they build tension with nothing. With no sound, with no, they eventually kind of put in a little bit of a score and a soundtrack in the background, and it helps build it up a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's what I love. And obviously, not to give spoilers away or anything like that, like, I love what I've seen or read from Krasinski over the course of the last few weeks, that he basically said, yes, in a sense, it's a horror movie, it's a thriller, all of that. But in the long run, it's a love letter to my children. Yeah. And when you watch the film, it sounds so weird to say that, but once you watch the film, it makes so much sense, because there's parts in this movie where you're just it like hurt me, and I could be a sensitive person, and there are a few moments where it's like, oh my gosh, like what. Like, you kind of just like, wow, just the power of everything was so amazing. So I agree with you. I'm not going to say it's the best horror movie of all time or anything like that, but from a pure movie going standpoint, it's fantastic.
without spoiling anything, there's a point, there's points in the movie where it's like you just said, it's undoubtedly emotional, and I felt myself holding back my emotions. That this was the part of the experience. Like I felt myself holding back my emotions because I'd get loud. Like I put my hand over my mouth because I'd be afraid of making a noise, and that's part of what made it so engrossing. I mean, I have to applaud. I know a movie like next week, like the Avengers, is going to be getting all the attention, and it's going to have the pre-releases, and it's going to be a big weekend next week. But that's a formulaic superhero movie. For as much as I like them, I know I know you told me that you're not a big fan of them. Those movies have a formula. The good guys have a setback. Whatever else, it's not as unique. I think A Quiet Place is a movie that's probably might even be getting attention for the Oscars next year. I'm not the biggest film buff, but I think it should. I think you see movies like Get Out have like in a similar way of being made, in a similar like low key concept, getting that kind of attention. And I honestly believe that A Quiet Place will be come next March will be in that same kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I think it should. And what I love about and no knock on superhero movies, like like I told you, like I'm not the biggest fan.
Yeah.
And I've watched them in the past, but it's never been something that completely draws my attention. But what I love and what I love about a movie like A Quiet Place is I love things that are original. And I love screenwriting that's original. That's why I found Get Out to be so fascinating in that sense, because it is a story that is created from nothing. When so many things nowadays are taken, they're remakes of things or taken from comic books or whatever. And a lot of things are taken from books, obviously. But I could appreciate a little bit of originality. So that's why I liked a movie like A Quiet Place so much, because it was very familiar, but so different than anything I'd ever seen.
We are a week out from the draft. He is Matt Eurich. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Eurich. Does great work for 247 Sports, excuse me, and CBS Interactive. Matt, thank you for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Anytime.
You can follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron, another one of your great sources for Bears draft coming up. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. And this has been a quiet episode of WCG Radio. Stay classy, everybody.